We have a super interesting topic to discuss right now, which is who owns what assets in the race to control the pathway system of pickleball, UPA versus APP, because we've seen the announcement of the Breakthrough Series, the competitor to PPA's Challenger Series, which the APP just released, the Breakthrough Series. So as we started to do this deep dive on what are the differences between the two series, it led us down a different path. Who's going to control, own, and operate the true pathway system in pickleball? So when we ran Duper, something that was really important to us was owning the national championship, the Duper Collegiate National Championship, and then building a pathway system where based on your Duper, right, you're elevated on this ladder-like progression through the customer journey of pickleball. Whether you're 10 years old, you get that Duper, and that leads you to your first Duper Junior tournament, then minor league pickleball, then collegiate pickleball, then could you be drafted to Major League Pickleball? So it's really important to own the system, and we're seeing both tours trying to do that right now.
Well, if you look at how the world is laid out now, it's like we have the US Open and Nationals as this sort of sidebar thing, but Nationals, you get points on the APP, but also there's an APP collegiate and a Duper collegiate.
We're going to talk about that.
And we are now seeing the APP Breakthrough, but they still also have Next Gen, or are they combining Next Gen and Breakthrough?
So I've laid it out. The APP has 26 events across 5 different assets: APP Next Gen, the Collegiate Series, now the Breakthrough Series, the Pro Tour, and the AARP Champions Tour. And as you just alluded to, APP works with USA Pickleball. They're partnered, and USA Pickleball controls Nationals. So Nationals does their seeding based on your APP Tour point events, your APP Tour points based on APP events for pros. And then they're using UTRP and how you do in their APP Golden Ticket qualifier events. So you could kind of throw Nationals into that bucket, is my point. But then PPA has their Junior PPA Tour. They have the Australia and Asia Tours. They have their American Pro Tour. They have Major League Pickleball and Worlds, their competitor to Nationals. But PPA also works with Duper, who controls the Duper Collegiate National Championship and Duper and the Dink Minor League Pickleball. Of course, I already mentioned USA Pickleball has the Golden Ticket qualifiers, partnered with APP leading to Nationals, and that's a pathway system in itself. And I think, where do we think each tour has done a better job? And if you were giving advice to either an amateur or an up-and-coming pro player, where would you tell them to play? Which pathway system would you have them follow? Oh, sorry, and before you answer that, I want to mention the UPA does a great job of kind of painting this picture that if you follow their pathway, you get rewarded. So do you remember when the Utah Black Diamonds, owned by Connor Pardo, drafted, I'm going to butcher her name, and their whole story was...
Mevdish.
Yes.
Yeah.
And their whole story was she was the top collegiate player and she got drafted to a Major League Pickleball team. Ergo, you should play our collegiate pickleball events. Like they were painting
selling
that
this
picture,
idea
selling a dream.
Mm-hmm.
But whatever
you could
happened,
be the next Colin Schick. You could be the next Mevdish. You could be the next.
But sidebar has that girl. But sidebar have Ava
has she played?
And Mevdish played a single event. This is a total sidebar.
I actually haven't looked.
But they sure sold that story really hard.
Yeah.
So anyway, back to my question.
Was she a 6th spot? Because Elise and Callie are now Utah?
No, Elise and Jeannie. Erikina.
Jeannie for Jeannie.
So where do you think each of these entities has done a better job?
Right. And the general kind of argument all along has been that APP has been a good place for people to gain the recognition and then pivot to PPA. Is PPA trying to eclipse that storyline, feeling like that's the one thing people give APP credit for? And they're like, well, let's just create a Challenger Series so people don't think, oh, I'll go to the APP as a free agent, establish myself, and then when I'm, known enough and getting good enough partners, prize money.
So let's talk about Breakthrough versus Challenger specifically. The APP Breakthrough. They're not live streamed. There's 5 of them: Boise, Brigham, Griffin, Georgia, Detroit, Robbinsville, New Jersey. There are points and prize money. So walk us through for the APP Breakthrough Series points and prize money, and then let's compare it to the Challenger.
So basically winning a gold medal at an APP Breakthrough gets you 60 points, which is roughly equivalent to a round of 32 main draw win in a
Normal event.
In a normal event. It's a little bit more than that. So it's like the equivalent of a win and a half, let's say. Or a main draw win in a major. That would be your 150K points, 150K events for APP. And then the prize money is $600 for a gold, which would equate basically to less than a quarterfinal.
Okay. So now let's contrast that to the Challenger Series. Talk to me about the points you can earn in a Challenger Series event, which is PPA, the associated prize money. And then I think we also need to talk about the fact that in these Challenger events, you have PPA signed season players competing in them. I don't see that in the Breakthrough Series.
Yeah, it was interesting. I did a little bit of a dive on the PPA Challenger because we know Angie and Scarpa had triple crowned in New England, but it looks like that was the only event they played in the Challenger Series. I think they've had 3 so far. And most of the players I did see were players that I only knew because I look at brackets a lot. But for the most part, they were not like your known kind of lower level signed players. I saw like a Pierina Imperato, that kind of player. Your players you don't often see on the live stream, let's say. But points wise, a PPA Challenger Series gets you 125 points, which is roughly equal to a round of 32 in a major or a round of 16 win in the other events, or in their lowest level event, a quarterfinal in the PPA 500 level. And prize money, they don't publish. What they said is it's a $10,000 purse. So I kind of did some rough math in comparison to their normal events, and I think it's basically equal to like $1,000 or $1,500 for a win, which would put you again at like a quarterfinalist or a semifinalist level prize money. But we know PPA prize money is also kind of a weird thing to compare because most of the players are on salaries, so
you get paid more if you're signed versus unsigned.
Yeah,
there are 14 Challenger events, 14 compared to 5 on the APP Breakthrough Series.
Wow. That's a big difference. And the other thing I just remembered was the prize money is actually half of that if you're not signed. So most of these players aren't signed. So it's really like the equivalent of being like a semifinalist.
So I think there's 2 conversations here. Is like, who's going to own the pathway system of pickleball? And the answer to that is only time will tell. Both tours are really trying to do that right now, trying to show you that when you're 8 years old, you can enter their tour, their challenger, their junior tour, which leads to XYZ, which leads to the pro tour. And then the second question is, where would you play? What would you be doing right now? Like, I wouldn't want to go if I'm up and coming. I mean, I'd want to play as much as I could,
right,
while saving costs, trying to play locally. Go ahead, Kristin.
The value of a free agency, right? Like, at what point does it make sense to sign an exclusive contract? And the other thing we didn't compare is entry fees. Are the entry fees the same?
That's a big one. That's a big one.
In the APP, if you win a gold medal, you don't pay pay entry fees the rest of the year. But their entry fees, I think, run you about like $450 if you played 3 events.
So for an APP Breakthrough Series in Boise on September 4th, you have $100 per event versus what we said was $70 per event for PPA Flower City Challenger June 27th in Rochester.
Yeah, so basically $210 for a Challenger PPA and $300 if you played 3 events in the APP.
So if I'm an up-and-coming pro, I'm trying to play as much as I can on at local money balls, on the APP, on the PPA, just trying to get results. I always get asked, what's the best and quickest way to become a pro? And I always ask the question, well, have you won at 5-0 yet? And if the answer to that is yes, awesome. Let's go ahead and talk about now these Challenger events. And if the answer is no, go win at 5-0. Like, I'm a big believer in like winning begets winning.
Yeah. Well, and all of that is somewhat moot to say, like, what is the real life of a success story in pickleball? Most of your money is still not coming from prize money. So no matter how much we break down and compare these feeder tours, it's almost not the point. The point is, how can I use my talent to pivot into the best sponsors, the best exposure, the best social media,
Totally,
and getting myself the best partners.
Let's talk about Grayson Goldin, top singles player on the APP Tour, recently signing with the PPA Tour. You ran some numbers, Kristin, and I would love for you to take us through kind of what goes into someone's decision-making process from a financial perspective, one tour or the other.
Yeah, so we went ahead and assumed that a flat estimated $1,200 in expenses is going into any of these tour stops that require travel, right? So obviously you can adjust that by finding housing and driving, but if we just throw $1,200 as the figure for expenses, the biggest difference for Grayson is now he's going to be playing 20 events, so that means
more
60
expenses.
Events, but 20 different tour stops, at least 26 often for these people. So 20 events at $1,200 is going to run him $24,000. And we can assume he's probably going to get to the semis maybe 6 times in those 60 opportunities, mostly in singles. And on the website currently for the PPA, that would mean $1,018. So he'd win $6,000 in prize money, which means that
on a $30,000 contract,
if he's on
he could be on more, he could be on less. We don't know what he's on. And,
Right.
and I don't even think we need to say like Grayson specifically. This is just
just a hypothetical
person.
person who maybe gets to a semis a few times in the year and is not going to be, winning gold medals 20 times. So really the question is, at what point does the contract net out to a better experience than playing 10 APP events, assuming they have about 12 and you're going to maybe miss a couple? So at those 10 events, that's then going to be $12,000 in expenses. And if you're Grayson, you're winning a singles gold maybe twice a year, a silver twice, maybe more, and a bronze 5 times. So if you net that out, he ends up at $16,500, which means that his $30,000 contract in the PPA would net him out at 12. So the most significant factor, other than obviously he's going to medal more often in an APP than a PPA, is the amount of events he has to play, those extra expenses.
What's interesting, so in your summary, which again, we don't know if this is accurate or not, we haven't spoken to Grayson, but I think this is a good example, right? You have this player netting more on an APP and playing fewer events. What this isn't including is if someone like a Grayson, who is a great singles player, wins nationals, that's $8,000. And if they win the US Open, so those 2 events, you're exempt. You cannot play if you sign this PPA event. So that net $16,000 on the APP is not including the ancillary earning opportunities, US Open, nationals, and then any type of international contract.
Exactly. So, I don't know if you want to get into the potential of a person on the APP like you or Megan or...
Yeah, I think if you're doing really well on the APP, you're winning between, $50 and $90,000.
Right.
In prize money. And that's not including sponsor doubling. That's just including you played your 10 events on the APP. They double your prize money if you're playing that many events. So you're in that 50 to 90 range if you're consistently medaling.
Right. And then you compare that to kind of like a middle of the road person who got in on the early contracts on PPA that maybe were 150. Obviously, that makes sense for a lot of those people because they don't even have to go make prize money. But those contracts that happened 3 years ago or 2 years ago for those 100,000 plus are not a lot of what we're seeing or hearing about in these newer signings.
I can only imagine a lot of players like a Grayson, for example, are thinking, I'm going to get more exposure on the PPA. You hear that a lot. And I think
they stream more courts.
So
there is something to be said about even if you're not getting to a semis, you're getting some streaming on their side courts.
Yeah, I think they do a good job of owning these media assets or partnering with these media assets like a Kitchen, like a Dink, Pickleball.com, which is purely operated by UPA employees. But from like an APP perspective, if you are medaling, you're like on ESPN. It feels like ESPN Plus every other weekend, or CBS Sports or Fox Sports. And like for me, I have a lot of exposure on the APP with that time. So it's interesting, that sales point of like, you're going to have more exposure.
The other thing now, especially with a lot of these players like the Brashes or, you know, Matt and Lucy not being on MLP teams, and all of you guys not being eligible as unsigned players to be on MLP teams, you'd think probably Grayson is going to end up on an MLP team. And he is exactly the type of, you know, camaraderie, high energy singles player that I'm sure is very excited about that aspect of it too. And so you have to factor in that exposure, and that, you know, so many partnerships also come out of MLP. And I think that, I don't know if people focus on that aspect of MLP enough, because we know so much of your future in this sport comes down to who you're playing with.
We talked to Jack Monroe in a little bit kind of about why he thinks some players who aren't doing great on the APP sign with the PPA. Like, it's only getting tougher, right?
Right. And I think that is kind of our point, is like, if you're not Megan and Jill and you're on the APP and the PPA offers you more than $25,000, it probably makes sense. If you're not feeling like you're the next Jack Monroe, if you're not the next guy on the podium every single week in multiple events, yeah, the insurance policy is a contract. Now, if you're some of these PPA contracts who are $0 contracts, I'm not sure what the point is, other than you don't want
I'm going to disagree with you.
Entry fees.
I'm going to disagree with you. I still don't think that makes sense to go, because you are foregoing the other opportunities, like the U.S. Open, like international, and we're seeing people went to like global sports in India, and Aiden Shank walked away with MVP and make some good cash.
Caught your attention, got a good partner.
100%.
Right.
So I'm going to disagree with you. And I think that also is kind of a weird premise. If I don't think I can cut it here, I'm going to go there where it's harder. Like, I don't think that makes sense. Like, if you can't bet on yourself.
No, I think there's a lot of people who are not betting on themselves, at least with their actions. They want to, but you know, it's also hard to sit there and say they're not betting on themselves when they could just as easily be telling themselves, I'm here at the, you know, the bigger tour, and as soon as I keep improving my skills, I'm going to prove myself against these players. There's no one answer. This is an impossible question to conclude, but there are the numbers, and I think people will find it interesting to compare and contrast how they've laid out their pathways.
This Pickleball Life.